A quiet cul-de-sac unraveled fast when one neighbor's harmless shortcut sent a flood of chlorinated chaos into the wrong yard, triggering cameras, fines, revenge, and a showdown no one saw coming. Let me start from beginning. The trouble began on a humid July morning when the neighborhood still slept under a blanket of still, heavy air. From the outside, every house on the cul-de-sac appeared peaceful. Lawns trimmed, driveways spotless, fences freshly painted. But beneath that curated quiet was a simmering tension waiting for the smallest spark. That spark came in the form of a neighbor who believed property lines were merely suggestions and personal responsibility was an optional accessory. For years, the homeowner had kept their yard immaculate, each blade of grass trimmed with meticulous care, each bush sculpted, each paver aligned with geometric perfection. It was the pride of the neighborhood, the standard against which all others measured. That was precisely why the neighboring yard stood out in such stark contrast. The man who lived there viewed maintenance as more of a theoretical concept. His lawn was patchy and uneven, his tools scattered like an abstract art installation, and his pool, an aging, above-ground beast, was always teetering on the edge of some minor disaster. The first sign of trouble was the smell. A faint chlorine scent drifted through the air and settled over the homeowner's yard like an unwelcome guest. At first, it was dismissed as general neighborhood activity. But then the grass along the side fence, normally vibrant and resilient, began to yellow. Patches appeared as though someone had splashed chemicals with reckless abandon. By late afternoon, entire sections of the yard looked tired, wilted, and damp. The homeowner walked the perimeter, searching for clues. The soil squished under shoes in places that had no business being wet. Gnarled earth revealed pooling water that refused to evaporate despite the heat. The discovery of a suspiciously flowing stream of clear water trickling from beneath the neighbor's fence was the final confirmation. The neighbor had found a shortcut, draining his pool directly into the adjacent yard. That discovery sparked an unsettling mix of irritation and curiosity. Why drain it there? Why not the storm drain, the legally required option? But the more the homeowner thought, the more the reason became obvious. Dumping on someone else's lawn was simply easier and cheaper. No hoses to run, no need to pace around the curb, no concern for consequences. Instead of approaching the neighbor immediately, the homeowner decided to take a composed and calculated approach. Documentation was the most powerful tool in any suburbia conflict, and the homeowner understood this well. The first step was photographing the damage, the yellowed grass, the eroded soil, the trickling water. The second step was installing a small, discrete camera facing the fence line. The device blended perfectly with the surrounding foliage, invisible to anyone who didn't know its purpose. The next morning brought the first recorded evidence. Grainy footage captured the neighbor walking across his backyard with a thick blue pool hose dragging behind him. Instead of directing the hose toward any proper drainage path, he pushed it through a gap in the shared fence. The camera captured the gush of water spraying onto the homeowner's lawn with shocking force. The neighbor walked away without even glancing back, as if dumping hundreds of gallons of chlorinated water was simply part of his morning routine. More water flowed, more damage spread. The lawn that had once been a neighborhood hallmark deteriorated into an eyesore. The camera captured each moment with unblinking accuracy, transforming frustration into a solid case, a foundation for the confrontation that would inevitably come. By the end of the week, the homeowner had a digital mountain of evidence. Photos, videos, timestamps, measurements, and a detailed log outlining the exact progression of lawn destruction. The situation had escalated quickly, but the homeowner knew not to rush. Suburban battles required strategy, not impulse. As evening fell on the seventh day, the homeowner stood at the back fence, staring at the water-soaked ground. The air felt heavier than usual, as if the neighborhood itself sensed the impending storm. Not of weather, but of conflict. The homeowner wasn't just irritated anymore, they were preparing, planning, calculating the next move. And with the evidence collected, the next step would shift the entire power dynamic on the block. A knock at the neighbor's door was not necessary. Something far more effective was about to unfold. The first chapter of this quiet war was ending, and the next would begin with a level of escalation the neighbor never expected. The homeowner did not sleep well the night before the escalation. Every time they closed their eyes, the image of the neighbor's hose shoved through the fence replayed with irritating clarity. But irritation alone wasn't enough to take action. Strategy was essential. And suburban strategy meant knowing whom to contact, whom to pressure, and whom to quietly involve in the battle. The first call was to the city's Environmental Enforcement Department. Chlorinated water, especially in large quantities, had strict rules attached to its disposal. Dumping it on another property, not to mention into the soil, was absolutely prohibited. The official on the other end of the phone didn't just sound concerned, they sounded eager. Violations like this weren't minor missteps. They were textbook examples of enforceable fines. A report was filed. Evidence was submitted. Video recordings, photographs, logs, all meticulously organized. The homeowner didn't embellish or dramatize. The facts were damning enough on their own. The official assured that an inspector would be dispatched soon. The second call was to the HOA, a group known for treating every minor dispute as though it were a matter of national security. Their rules were famously strict, and they prided themselves on maintaining neighborhood harmony, even if their methods occasionally bordered on theatrical. When presented with the evidence, the HOA board reacted with predictable indignation. Violations like unauthorized drainage, property damage, and disregard for community guidelines were the kind of cases they relished. Within 48 hours, the inspector arrived. The homeowner watched from behind their window blinds as the city official stepped onto the neighbor's property with a clipboard and a stern expression. The neighbor greeted the inspector with visible confusion, scratching his head as though the situation were some ridiculous misunderstanding. But confusion gave way to defensiveness. Arms crossed, shoulders squared, posture sharpened with irritation. The inspector wasn't swayed. They walked directly to the fence line, pointed to the discolored grass, and traced the path of water damage with a clinical precision. The neighbor attempted to protest, gesturing wildly toward the pool and muttering excuses that held no weight. Chlorine levels alone were enough to establish the violation. The inspector took notes, photographed evidence, and finally handed the neighbor a bright yellow violation notice. The fine was steep, steeper than the homeowner imagined, enough to make anyone reconsider their shortcuts. But the neighbor's reaction wasn't remorseful, it was resentful. From the homeowner's window, the neighbor's expression was unmistakable. He wasn't chastened, he was angry, and his anger pointed directly at the homeowner. Later that afternoon, the HOA made their appearance. Clipboard-wielding members marched up to the neighbor's property, inspecting, documenting, reciting regulations verbatim. Their notice was softer compared to the city's, but still carried weight. Repair the damage, cease all unauthorized drainage, and submit a proper maintenance plan for the pool. The neighborhood buzzed with subtle whispers and curious glances, the kind of passive gossip that spread quickly but quietly. Children riding bikes slowed down near the affected houses, dog walkers paused longer than usual, curtains twitched as hidden observers followed every movement between the two properties. As expected, the neighbor approached the homeowner the next day, not with an apology, but with a glare radiating a mixture of blame and disbelief. There were no words exchanged, but the message was clear. He believed the homeowner had overreacted. He saw himself as the victim of excessive scrutiny. His wounded pride fueled an unspoken hostility that seeped into the air like humidity before a storm. The homeowner, however, remained calm. Documentation had worked once, and it would work again if necessary. Cameras stayed in place, logs continued. The grass slowly recovered with careful treatment, though several patches still bore the scars of chlorine burn.
But the neighbor wasn't done. His resentment morphed into something quieter, more calculated. Late at night, he paced his backyard with a flashlight. He tinkered with his pool like a man searching for loopholes. He avoided direct confrontation, but his presence felt heavier, more deliberate. Then one morning, new evidence emerged. Not of water this time, but of a makeshift drainage setup positioned suspiciously close to the fence. It wasn't actively dumping water yet, but its placement suggested future attempts. The homeowner recognized the pattern. When someone had already taken the easy route once, they were likely to attempt it again, unless the consequences outweighed the convenience. And as the homeowner took fresh pictures of the setup, it became clear that another escalation was coming. The conflict was far from resolved. If anything, the neighbor's stubbornness guaranteed the next chapter would be messier than the first.
The tension in the neighborhood reached a palpable peak during the weeks that followed. Even the air felt charged with an uneasy expectancy. Every morning, the homeowner checked the camera footage. Every afternoon, they inspected the perimeter. By then, the lawn was recovering, but the memory of what happened remained etched in the soil. The neighbor's resentment simmered visibly. He mowed his lawn with unnecessary force, slammed tools into the ground, and moved around his yard like someone preparing for an unseen confrontation. The makeshift drainage rig stayed positioned right at the fence line, its looming presence a taunt more than a practicality. Then came the night of the storm. It was unexpected, rolling in fast with dark, churning clouds and a wind that rattled windows. Heavy rain battered rooftops and gutters overflowed. Thunder cracked like the prelude to a coming reckoning. It should have been a typical summer storm, intense but ordinary, but the neighbor saw it as an opportunity. In the middle of the downpour, the camera captured movement. The neighbor sprinted across his yard, dragging the same blue hose behind him, the very same one used weeks earlier. The storm provided the perfect cover, or so he thought. He shoved the hose through the fence again, blending the chlorinated pool water with the already heavy rainfall. He likely assumed the runoff would mask the evidence. The storm's chaos, he believed, offered plausible deniability. But what he failed to consider was the drainage system in the homeowner's yard. Designed with precise grading and gravel line channels, it funneled water efficiently toward the street. This meant that the moment his pool water entered the yard, it didn't soak quietly into the soil. It rushed toward the drainage outlet, carrying traces of chlorine and debris straight into the public drainage system. By sunrise, the damage was clear. Grass washed out, mulch displaced, soil eroded in sharp, unmistakable streaks. But even more significant was the contaminated runoff now sitting in the street drainage basin, something the city took extremely seriously. The homeowner reviewed the footage, piecing together the timeline. Every critical moment was captured in crisp detail. The neighbor crouched by the pool valve, the hose threading through the fence, the unmistakable stream of chemically treated water pouring out. Storm or no storm, his intent was impossible to deny. This time, the homeowner didn't just file another report. They escalated it immediately to environmental enforcement and stormwater management. The footage wasn't just proof of property damage, now it documented contamination of a public drainage system, a violation with much more severe consequences. The inspector returned within hours. Their expression was colder than before, their questions sharper. They inspected the street, the drainage basin, the yard, and the pool. The neighbor attempted to feign innocence again, blaming the storm, the runoff, and even the homeowner's drainage system. But the video evidence dismantled every excuse. When the fine was issued, it was staggering. Not just a penalty for improper discharge, but an environmental violation with associated cleanup fees and mandatory corrective actions. The neighbor stood on his driveway, reading the paperwork, his face shifting from outrage to disbelief to a dawning realization that he had gone too far. The Crystal neighborhood also added its own set of consequences. Mandatory review of all backyard equipment, required pool maintenance inspections,
and a special assessment to cover partial repairs to the affected landscaping between the properties. They even mandated installation of a proper drainage route, expensive, inconvenient, and overseen with relentless scrutiny. In the days that followed, the neighbor's behavior changed, not out of newfound respect, but resignation. His resentment dimmed, overshadowed by the weight of financial consequences. He spent hours trying to repair the damage, patching soil, removing sodden mulch, and quietly dismantling the illegal drainage setup. His presence became subdued, his movements slower, his posture defeated. The homeowner, meanwhile, focused on restoring their yard. Fresh sod was laid down, soil was replenished, the lingering traces of chlorine finally faded. The lawn recovered, stronger and greener than before, while the neighbor's yard became a patchwork of hasty repairs and half-finished projects. Over time, the cul-de-sac returned to its usual quiet. The tension faded, the storm passed, both the literal one and the neighborly one. But the story lived on, whispered occasionally among residents, told as a cautionary tale about shortcuts, consequences, and the quiet power of documentation. The neighbor never attempted another stunt. The pool remained strictly regulated. And the homeowner, armed with both evidence and patience, maintained their property with the same meticulous care as always. The lesson lingered unmistakably. When someone tries to drain their problems into your yard, sometimes the best response is to let the consequences drain right back onto them.